there are two terms that feminists use to diagnose power relationships in society. I want your view on the utility of these terms. Is there a place within Muslim discourse to use the terms misogyny and patriarchy?
Look, words are important because they allow you to make distinctions. On a side note, I think one of the beauties of the Quran is it's in Arabic, right?
Yes.
And I think there is a massive wisdom, an immense wisdom behind the Quran being in Arabic, because Arabic is such a rich language that it allows you to make distinctions, because language allows you to make distinctions. For example, how many words in love in English? 2, 3? Some of them are borrowed from the French anyway, yeah?
Yes.
So in Arabic, I think you have like what? At least over what? I don't know. There's over 10, over 20, right? And each description of love will give you a certain distinction, right? You have ishq, for example, which is a possessive type of love. So we know what type of love it is. That language allows us to make a distinction.
Yes.
So language is so important to make distinctions. However, words are also vehicles to meaning, and also words also carry ideological baggage. So when it comes to misogyny and patriarchy, you have to be careful, because who are you talking to? If I'm talking to a feminist, I'm saying that's misogyny, then what am I doing here? I'm actually maybe adopting her assumptions and her worldview. So I'm not really engaging with her in the right way, because I don't carry those assumptions. Do you see? So I think it's very important, depending on what audience we talk to, that we have to unpack those terms. But as a basic primary starting point, if you think patriarchy is the system of governance, or the system of social life, or the system of a family where the father or the eldest male is the one that takes care of the family and the one that is the protector and maintainer, absolutely Islam is the patriarchy, if you define it that way. Yeah. But if you define patriarchy as a form of injustice and gender arrogance, no, that's not Islam.
Right.
So it depends. Words carry ideological baggage, and they're vehicles to meaning. So sometimes you have to unpack that depending who your audience is. But there's nothing wrong with saying, yes, of course, Islam has an amazing complementarian system. Islam has given the role of the husband, for example, to use as an example, to, qawwamuna, to have this kind of authority, and to have this, they are the protectors and maintainers of the women folk. Yeah. That's a very important thing. And with all due respect, these are necessary hierarchies in order to establish the moral optimization, social optimization, and individual well-being of everyone within society. And we're not going to get lessons from the liberals or the secularists or the postmodernists, with all due respect. The divorce rates, the social fragmentation and decay. They don't even know how to define a male and a female. They got all these issues going on. With all due respect, you're in no position to give us any moral lessons on this issue. These are established religious hierarchies coming from Allah and the Prophet ﷺ that have benefited us tremendously, and they continue to do so. That's why people are going to the Muslim mode, right? Because, they want that sense of traditional family, right? And that's, and we know all the problems in the West at the moment concerning these things. So when it comes to misogyny, if it's a prejudice or a bias or a dislike or a hatred for women, of course, that's haram, for sure. This is not part of our tradition. We need to honor our women. We need to protect our women. We need to love and care for our women. We need to ensure economically, socially, intellectually, emotionally, physically, that they have a sense of well-being. This is part of the responsibility of the state, of the husband, of the father. So we honor our women, right? We would start a war for one woman, right? This is how much we honor them. And we see this in law. We see this in the social structures of our society. So do we have a dislike and a hatred for women or prejudice against them? Of course not. So we're not misogynistic from that perspective. However, when the liberals or the postmodernists or the Marxists, whoever they are, they point the finger at Islam and say, you're misogynists, they're not saying you're misogynist that you hate women. They're saying because you're not in line with our notions of equality, you're not in line with our notions of rights, and we have to be very careful about that, right? Because, for example, this whole abortion debate,
yes,
notwithstanding the kind of jurisprudential nuances and the virtue ethics and the context, as the prima facie reading and the initial premise and the position is that abortion is haram. Khalas. No one's going to disagree with that, yeah? So we're not applying the law in certain contexts here. We're saying, what is the law? Abortion is haram. It's murder. Some people say this is misogyny, right? Because it's her body, her choice. So what is the assumption here? The assumption is that number one, it's her body and it's her choice. And number one, a woman has that right. But with all due respect, in the Islamic discourse, we don't adopt your false philosophical assumption, which is we own ourselves. We don't own ourselves, bro. Who owns us? Allah. This is the key aspect of divine creative agency. This is the key aspect of the oneness, the tawheed of rububiyyah, meaning Allah is the master, the owner, the maintainer of everything that exists. So if Allah owns me, He has the right to tell me what to do with my body. Yes. So the discourse shifts, doesn't it? And this is an aqidah issue. But what happens, generally speaking, with some scholars or imams or women folk or du'at, they don't understand these very fundamental issues, and they just jump into the kind of, the epistemological, metaphysical lizard hole, thinking it's the Cave of Hera. Because they adopt liberal or postmodern false assumptions and epistemic frames of reference, yeah? And we need to be careful with that. So I know this is a long answer to a short question, but the thing is, we have to be careful in the words that we use and unpack them to our audiences in a particular way. So I wouldn't use, for example, misogyny with a feminist, for example. I unpack exactly what our key principles are. And this is important as a wider discussion as well, understanding Islam on a very deep, fundamental level. Take the whole LGBTQ plus issue, right?
Yeah.
So the whole issue about, why do you think homosexuality is a crime against God and it's a sin? You're a bigot. You hate, right? And we just lap that in and we have no defense. We have to turn the table and say, look, we're going to respect you. If you're a human being, if you're my next door neighbor, I'll give you CPR if you have a heart attack. I'll give you milk if you need milk. If your child needs babysitting, I'll babysit your child, yeah? Sure. So we have this sense of taking care of people. The Prophet had a mushrik in his house and fed him, right? The famous story that he fed him 7 bowls of milk. So we have this sense of coexistence and helping people and taking care of people. And our engagement is one of dawah as well. We're committed to the goodness and guidance. That's the default position of any human being. Yeah. Now, with the LGBTQ narrative, we need to reframe it and say, hold on a second, with all due respect, you have false assumptions and you're assuming that your kind of liberal ethic is actually universal. No, it's not universal. And we saw this with the whole Qatar World Cup debate, right? The reason it's not universal because you assume you have self-ownership and you assume a utilitarian ethic. Islam doesn't assume those things. We have the correct assumptions. We know Allah owns us, and we know the right way in terms of our frame of reference for ethics is divine commands. It's not based on a kind of liberal utilitarianism, right? Yeah. When we explain that they have those assumptions and those assumptions require warrant, they require justification, then you put them on the back foot. And you have to make them realize that this is not universal. And we have a certain aqidah. This doesn't mean you have to now be aggressive to them or express hate to them. Especially in our context as minorities, we're here to engage positively. We're dedicated to your guidance and your goodness. That's why we're telling you, you have false philosophical and moral assumptions. Don't assume they are universal. We have the correct assumption, which is Allah owns us. Oh, you don't know? Let me show you that Allah exists. Let me show you why the Quran is true. So you bring it back to a dawah discourse. And you also show them that the way to live your life is by obeying God's commands. That's what a Muslim is. You surrender to God's commands. Oh, but I don't believe in that. Okay, let me show you why you should. So that changes the discourse from discussing these kind of, moral issues to the foundation. And they may say, okay, well, if that's true, that we have assumptions, you have assumptions, then don't force it on us. Okay, well, thank you. Jazakallah khair. Stop forcing it down our throats as well. Right? That's what's happening at schools, right? And that's why there's an explosion of people having gender dysphoria now because, we saw this, even the Telegraph wrote about this and I think The Guardian. So the reason I mention this in a very quick way is to show that once you understand your aqidah and the key provable assumptions in our tradition, then we could relate to people in a way that's intellectual and compassionate and wise and show them, hold on a second, you don't have universal moral principles here. Yes. And you can't force this down our throats,